Assalamu alaikum students. Today we are going to start our second chapter, and our second chapter is methods of research. In psychology, as we all know, that psychology is a scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. And when we talk about scientific study, it means that in psychology, the method of studies used are very scientific, they are standardized, systematic. In this chapter, we will discuss different methods of study that are involved in psychology. Research is a combination of two words, re and search. Searching facts, finding and exploring new things. Gathering of facts, which is followed by a thorough study. We may define research or study as exploration of facts lying hidden in some event or situation. But it involves a careful, objective, and critical approach that helps in finding relations between causes and effects or causes and deductions. Basically, a research starts with finding some problem and discovering its causes and effects. Research तहकीक नफ्सियात के अंदर तहकीक की बहुत ज़्यादा अहमियत है. सिर्फ नफ्सियात ही नहीं बल्कि किसी भी सब्जेक्ट में या किसी भी फील्ड में रिसर्च की बहुत अहमियत या सिग्निफिकेंस है. इस डेफिनेशन के मुताबिक तहकीक से मुराद नए हक़ाइक़ को तलाश करना और कॉज एंड इफ़ेक्ट रिलेशनशिप यानी कि उनकी वजूहात और उनके असरात को स्टडी करना. टाइप्स ऑफ रिसर्च. Basically, research can be classified in two types, scientific or pure research, empirical or applied research. Scientific research is a research in which causes and effects are objectively studied under controlled conditions. साइंटिफिक रिसर्च को प्योर रिसर्च या एक्सपेरिमेंटल रिसर्च भी कहा जाता है. रिसर्च के इस तरीक़ेकार में कॉज और इफ़ेक्ट यानी कि वजूहात और असरात को कंट्रोल कंडीशंस के अंदर स्टडी किया जाता है, या फिर यूँ भी कहा जा सकता है कि डिफरेंट टूल्स यानी कि आलात को डेवलप करना, नए तरीक़ेकार, न्यू मेथडोलॉजीज़ और न्यू कॉन्सेप्ट्स को डेवलप करना साइंटिफिक रिसर्च में शामिल है. The other type of research is known as empirical or applied research. In this research, efforts are made to find practical solutions to the problems of everyday life. In other words, the research whose findings are applied to everyday life is called empirical or applied research. Empirical और applied research के अंदर रोज़मर्रा ज़िंदगी के मसाइल को हल करने के लिए वो तमाम आलाजात या टूल्स जो कि प्योर रिसर्च या साइंटिफिक रिसर्च में डिज़ाइन किए जाते हैं, उन्हें अप्लाई किया जाता है. इसीलिए इसको अप्लाइड रिसर्च का नाम दिया गया है. Some of the important qualities of research are that it should be objective, it should be reliable, it should be precise and accurate, and researchers should have control over his sources. Now let's have a look at some of the methods of research in psychology. In this chapter, we are going to discuss 4 of important methods. The first one is observational method. The second is experimental method. The third is survey method, and the fourth one is clinical method or case history method. Now let's have a look at these methods in detail. Observational method or observation. Observation means to watch something carefully or examine it. किसी चीज़ का बगौर जायज़ा लेना, मुशाहिदा करना, गौर से किसी चीज़ को देखना। नफ्सियात के अंदर ऑब्जर्वेशन से मुराद एक ऐसा तरीक़ाकार है जिसमें किरदार, बिहेवियर, आउटवर्ड बिहेवियर को बगौर मुशाहिदा किया जाता है, उसको देखा जाता है, उसको नोट किया जाता है। Observation is the technique of collecting information about all the aspects of a problem. Observation could be simple as well as complex. It can be formal and informal. It can be natural and environmental. The three types of observational methods are introspection, external observation, natural observation. Introspection. Introspection refers to the direct study by the individual of his own mental processes. इंट्रोस्पेक्शन से मुराद ये है कि फ़र्द अपने अंदर झांकना, अपने ही ज़हनी आमाल और अपनी थिंकिंग और अपनी सोच को बगौर उसका जायज़ा लेना और उसका मुशाहिदा करना। Every person can examine his mental processes better and can convey them accurately. It is because mental states are subjective and no one else can have access to them. To put it in a different way, knowing about the states that go on in the mind all the time is called introspection. Introspection एक ऐसा तरीक़ाकार है कि जिसमें फ़र्द से उसके अपनी ज़हनी हालत के बारे में जांचने को या परखने को कहा जाता है, क्योंकि कोई भी फ़र्द जितनी अच्छे तरीके से अपनी ज़हन की कैफ़ियत के बारे में जान सकता है, कोई दूसरा नहीं जान सकता, क्योंकि मेंटल स्टेट या ज़हनी हालत एक सब्जेक्टिव, एक ज़ाती अमल है। सेंट ऑगस्टाइन वॉज द फर्स्ट टू अप्लाई दिस मेथड। सबसे पहले सेंट ऑगस्टाइन ने इस तरीक़ेकार का इस्तेमाल किया। Other than that, William Wundt and Titchener also employed this method in their labs. Structuralism and functionalism, which are two important schools of thoughts in psychology, also use introspection for the sake of study. Now let's have a look at some of the advantages of this method. Introspection gives us an opportunity to directly examine mind. So basically this method provides access to mind. Other than this method, there is no other way which can indicate an individual's personal feelings and emotions and his mental state. The second advantage is that introspection can help us to understand or to make diagnosis of different mental disorders, in which patient suffering from mental disorders can describe their problems and difficulties. It's an easy method. Introspection is very simple and easy method. No equipment or any difficult methodology is involved. One can simply describe his feelings in his own words, and anyone who can understand or utter some words and understand its meanings can describe his mental state. It takes immediate measures could be taken by using this method, because we can collect the information and it throws light on the nature of the problem and enables us to take immediate measures for its eradication. It is also an economical method because It does not involve any special arrangements, and it can be applied anywhere and any time. That's why it requires very less effort. So we can say that it is an effortless method. It can be carried out individually, and it makes it possible to study a number of individuals with little effort in a very short span of time. It provides basis for scientific observation, and it also provides basis for external observation. But it does have disadvantages. First of all, it's an unscientific method. Why? Because behaviorists, they believe that mental processes are described by the individual cannot be verified by any other means. Every individual, the way he perceives his feelings and problems is peculiar to him. So, individuals describe their feelings according to their own perspective. So, introspection varies from person to person. Secondly, mental processes are continuous. The mental state keeps on changing with time. So, because mental state is not a constant entity, or it is not a constant process, it is something which is changeable. That's why we cannot depend on the information provided by an individual completely, because it may change the very next moment. Its scope is limited because introspection cannot be applied on abnormal individuals, on children, and it is also not applicable on animals because they cannot describe their feelings. Another important disadvantage that cannot be avoided is the fact that introspection studies only conscious states, and it cannot express subconscious and unconscious processes going on mind, which are also part of mind. It could be upgraded though. Tishner suggested some of the measures to make introspection useful and practicable. By training of the individuals, and if the clients are reliable, its shortcomings can be removed. By repeating this method, if it is applied to one client and observations are compared repeatedly, then solid deductions can be made. And if the findings about the state, which is the subject of introspection, are set out immediately, better information can be gathered. Talking about the second type of observation, which is external observation. एक्सटर्नल ऑब्जर्वेशन को उर्दू में हम खारजी मुशाहिदा भी कहेंगे. This is the second important method of collecting information in psychology. Psychologist carries out scientific study of mental processes and behavior of individual. फर्द के responses, उसका किरदार, ज़ाहिरी किरदार, उसका रद्द अमल, उसके एक्शंस और इन्वायरमेंटल फैक्टर्स, इन सबको इस प्रोसेस में इन सब चीज़ों का मुशाहिदा किया जाता है. Other than that, the circumstances under which the client displays some peculiar reaction are also noted. जिस माहौल में या जिन हालात में रद्द अमल सामने आता है, उन हालात का भी जायज़ा लिया जाता है. External observation is indeed the method of behavioral observation, and it is the most favorite method of behaviorists. तो जितने भी किरदारियत मकतबा फ़िक्र से ताल्लुक़ रखने वाले साइकोलॉजिस्ट हैं, उनके लिए एक्सटर्नल ऑब्जर्वेशन एक बेहतरीन तरीक़ाकार है. Looking at some of the advantages of external observation, it's a scientific method because this method makes it possible to observe others' external behavior objectively. इस तरीक़ेकार की मारूज़ियत से इनकार नहीं किया जा सकता। ये एक मारूज़ी तरीका है। External observation facilitates access to the client's mental processes and states. In fact, mental states are manifested in external behavior. इसका दायराकार स्कोप भी बहुत वसी है क्योंकि एक्सटर्नल ऑब्जर्वेशन एप्लीकेबल है जानवरों पे, बच्चों पे और ऐसे मरीज जो कि ज़हनी आर्जा के शिकार हैं. So this method is suitable for all those who can not hide their external behavior. This method provides basis for psychological tests. This method led to the initiation of psychological tests. Many tests were devised to standardize the examination of individuals' mental processes, abilities, capacities, and skills, such as personality tests, aptitude tests, intelligence tests, attitude tests, etc. Now, looking at some of the disadvantages of external observation, though it is very useful method, but it comes to studying normal individual, it does not work effectively. It is because their genuine behavior does not show up in the external doings. They either put on pretended feelings or exaggerate them before others. ये एक इंसानी फितरत है कि जब आपका मुशाहिदा किया जा रहा होता है तो आप अपना नेचुरल एक फितरी या कुदरती बिहेवियर या रिस्पॉन्स नहीं देते. जब भी किसी शख्स को पता हो कि उसका मुशाहिदा किया जा रहा है तो वो दानिस्ता या नादानिस्ता, चाहते हुए या ना चाहते हुए भी अपने फितरी किरदार से हट जाता है या इनहराफ करता है. So it is therefore difficult to judge their behavior accurately. Limited scope. External behavior reflects only conscious states. अगर एक्सटर्नल ऑब्जर्वेशन की बात की जाए तो सबकॉन्शियस और अनकॉन्शियस स्टेट्स को भी नज़रअंदाज किया जाता है. This method is very time consuming and expensive and laborious. It takes a number of trained experts and much time to study the subject of external observation. It could be very tiring and long method. And when it comes to analysis and verification of observation, this method presents serious difficulties because normal individuals tend to behave differently on different occasions. For example, at one time an individual takes a thing cheerfully, while at the other the same thing sends him into a rage. Therefore, with this method, we cannot set the same standard for all individuals. तो जो इनफरादी फ़र्क one individual is different from the other individual and their responses vary in different situations. Keeping this in mind, this method cannot be accurate all the time. Though external observation can be improved by training experts, dealing with one client at a time, and if the duration is brief, and using other tools like audiovisual aids can be used to record facts, and later experts can analyze. The third type of observational method is natural observational method. In cases when it is not possible to make observations in a laboratory and when the natural conditions are required, observational method is used. And this method aims at the natural and pure reactions of individual under natural conditions. And researcher makes observation by visiting natural or real environment and records all the reactions and changes objectively. This method is very effective for the study of children in animal because children in animal cannot give their natural reactions when they are brought into an artificial environment. Other than that, this method can also be effectively applied to other individuals as well. Like survey and experimental method, it also involves careful planning of all its phases are observed with care and objectivity. Like any other research method, the first step is to formulate a problem so that there is a clear picture that what particular type of behavior and what individuals are to be observed at what time, at what place. It is also known as field study method. The field study method can be made by two types. A field study method of observation can be made by two types: participant observation and non-participant observation. In participant observation, the researcher joins the population or a group and becomes a part of the environment. Like, for example, particularly, this method is effective for the study of criminal gangs or beggars or drug addicts. The other type is non-participant observation. In this method, the researcher does not become the part of the environment. In fact, he studies and observes while staying aloof from them. And for this purpose, latest gadgets can be used like tape recorders or secret cameras. An important technique of non-participant observation is lost child technique, in which a child of a tender age is sent through a busy bazaar or market and he is asked to pretend to have lost his parents. And researchers studies the situation in hiding, noting what type of people approach the children, whether they help him or just watch the scene with amusement. And when the situation begins to get out of control, the researcher shows up and thanks the people, saying that he will reunite the child with his parents. Another example of non-participant observation is the situation which is created by a researcher to see how much cooperation people extend to a woman in trouble. By making a woman stand on a busy road and with her car bonnet lifted up. Seated at a distance, he keeps recording the behavior of people with the camera and observes at what types of people comes up to the woman for her help. Our second method that we're going to discuss is experimental method. Experimental method is a systematic and scientific way to analyze facts objectively. Experiments are made in laboratories. Experimental method scientifically studies stimuli and responses shown by the organism, and the interrelation of various variables and their effects are also analyzed. Experimental method, as said earlier, is systematic and some steps are followed in a sequence while performing an experiment. The first step is formulation of a problem. First of all, at the beginning of experimental method, the problem is determined so that it is clear that what is the subject and object of experiment. And once the problem is formulated, it is possible to move on. The second step is to formulate a hypothesis. Hypothesis is an assumed solution which is based on some rational arguments. At this time, there is no certain proof to, there is no certainty and there is nothing to prove whether our hypothesis is true or not. At the end of the experiment, the results will determine whether the hypothesis formulated is confirmed or rejected. Hypothesis is also called can be also known as an expected solution of the problem. No matter hypothesis rejected or accepted, it does not affect the experiment. Every hypothesis has some variables, some factors that keep on changing. Variables are the elements which vary. For example, temperature, emotional states, or maybe intelligence, ability to memorize. So these are the variables that could be the possible variables. Variables are of two types, independent and dependent. In an hypothesis, there are usually two variables which depend on each other. Somehow they are interrelated. The causes, events, or factors that exist in an environment and they appear independently without affecting the other variable are known as independent variable, while the variables or the variations brought about by an independent variable is called dependent variable. When change takes place in one variable affects the other variable, the variable that is changed will be called dependent variable. Variables are studied throughout the experiment. Other than dependent and independent variable, there are intervening variables as well in addition to these. There are other variables which affect the conduct of experiment. They can be of two types, internal variables and environmental variables. Inventory variables that relate to an individual's subjective states. For example, freshness, hunger, thirst, mental state, personality, age, experience, fatigue, etc. Environmental variables that exist in the environment and in the surroundings. For example, temperature, light, noise, disturbances. They all affect the individual's performances and his responses during the experiment. The fourth important step in an experimental method is experimental design. Experimental design is organized and phased methodology which an experimenter adopts. Experimental design has a very important aspect in experimental method. Some of the designs are randomized group design, match subject design, factorial design, before after research design, after only research design. The fifth step in stages of research is selection of subjects. And of course, while performing an experiment, we need subject to start our experiment and to perform our experiment on. In order to study independent variable and their effects during the experiment, one or more subjects are selected according to their experimental design. Generally, subjects can also be divided into two groups so that the results could be compared. One group is called experimental group and the other is called control group. The experimental group is the one on which the experiment is done, while control group is usually the group which is used for comparison. It refers to the subject or group of subjects which is studied like the experimental subject but to which independent variables do not apply. Through the study and observation of the control subject, one can tell whether the changes that has occurred in the experimental subject is really due to an independent variable or there are some other causes. Then comes the apparatus, the equipment which are needed for an experiment and to confirm or reject a hypothesis are known as apparatus. Now the nature of the experiment determines that what type of apparatus is going to be used. Like usually in psychology, the experiments that we perform in a psychology lab, apparatuses used usually are stopwatch, maze box, list of meaningful or meaningless words, star pattern, mirror drawing apparatus, Muller-Lye cards, pictures of deity, personality test, etc. Another important point that need to be taken into consideration while performing an experiment are the control conditions. The conditions or factors that can affect the result during the experiment should be taken into view, and experimenters should have control over them. If there is a need to change independent variables, the experimenter should have the leeway to do so. Besides, control conditions also include control over all types of intervening variables. To make sure that results are accurate and precise and are free from any sort of intervention, it is important to control all intervening variables. Results. Now the last phase of experiment is to determine and analyze the results. Once the subject's responses and reactions are analyzed, and statistical methods are used for analysis of the results. Now, statistical analysis or method make it easier to explain and compare results. And finally, the report of the result is compiled and set down. And in the report, it is determined whether the results confirm the proposed hypothesis or not.